Good morning and welcome to ASL's HR in 10.
At 10.
I'm Jason Perry,
And I'm Kimberly Bradshaw.
and each week we try in 10 minutes to keep you up to date with what's going on in the world of HR and employment law. I think this week we should do HR in 10 hours, Kimberly.
Yes, and you and I, between us, would accomplish that with no problems whatsoever.
And that's just on one subject, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you know, often a new incoming government brings change, and often we have an idea what might be coming, don't we?
Yes, we do.
I'm not sure we have.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some things that are looking likely, aren't there? But equally, well, I suppose we know the priorities, the cost of living, the NHS, etc., etc. But yeah, we haven't had the opportunity to listen to her policies
Yes.
over a
What's
period of campaigning and that kind of thing.
yes? What strikes me is usually government walks in with a manifesto, and you
Yeah,
have an idea what's coming. And broadly speaking, this should be following the manifesto of the last general election.
exactly.
However, he says with a huge degree of caution, there's some big things that have caught my attention that are on what is being described as a 30-day plan. Now, I'm assuming this is a 30-day plan to get the legislation through the House, because I can't see how you can actually get these changes. But some of these, I mean, let's start with the biggie: cost of living and national insurance. We all know national insurance went up in April for both employees and employers. And we know that there was then a rather creative adjustment made to it, which, if I recall correctly, was in July, which moved around all the thresholds. I understand that a Liz Truss government is going to reverse that. The problem is I don't know what that is. I don't know whether it's the employee national insurance. I don't know whether it's both sides. I don't know whether it's the thresholds. But something's going to happen, isn't it?
It is, and certainly whatever does happen, it's going to be another fast response and turnaround from the payroll providers. Um, and I think there's also, isn't there, the requirement to remove the requirement to list it separately on the
Oh,
payslips?
that's a lovely one, isn't it? I saw this yesterday, and I saw we can all remove the health and social care note that we have been encouraged to put on payslips. And I did a little, shall we say, poll yesterday within the ASL HR forum we run every week, and asked how many people had put the social care, the health and social care levy
Yeah.
note on their payslip, and pretty much no one knew that they were supposed to. So I don't think there'll be too many people worrying about moving that.
No, that tickled me as well. It's like, who knew?
Yes. Um, I read two things. One, that we were supposed to, and then I found a lighter note that said we'd all been encouraged to do this. And
Yeah.
I hadn't spotted anyone doing the encouraging over the past few months, so I'm not entirely sure where that one's going. But yes, that's clearly the national insurance is probably one of the biggest points. In part, it's a payroll provider problem, but what does this do for the cost of living? You and I have been talking for weeks about providing support for workers. Do we no longer need to do that, Kimberly? They're all going to be okay.
Well, we don't know. I mean, she's promising all these things. We were just talking about the fuel costs that have been announced this morning, not going up in October, being capped at 2.5, blah blah blah. But it's all very well it being said, but is it actually going to happen? Um, that's a whole new,
Yes.
you
Well,
know,
that one we have an announcement on today, apparently, and it's kind of being committed because I read about it in the Telegraph this morning, so it's clearly happening. Anything in the Telegraph's bound to happen, isn't it?
obviously. Press never lie about anything.
No, no. So we've got the change in fuel prices, which is one of the biggest drivers on inflation.
Mm.
that might actually stop. I mean, I'm not an economist and I'm very cautious when I get into this, but that might actually stop that huge upward pressure on inflation. And maybe we're not going to see the 18-20% inflation figures that we've all been concerned about by January. Perhaps we've peaked at 10%.
Well, that would be great if we have, and certainly, as we're in the countdown of number of weeks to Christmas now, that is potentially going to reassure people. But the proof's in the pudding, isn't it?
Yes. So we've got those things happening, and this massively changes the way in which we look at cost of living, I think. We've also got, I'm just going to ask you to put on your employee engagement hat for a moment. Um, and it caught my interest that we appear to have, and I might say almost a Thatcherite approach to unions and strikes. Two things really, really caught my attention here that apparently are going to happen in 30 days. One of which is there will be a minimum staffing level requirement during any strike. Now, if I'm understanding this correct, I don't know what the minimum staffing level is going to be, but let's just imagine, for example, we might have a postal strike in which the union were told they could only strike if there was a minimum of 25% of posties out working that day.
Mm.
Let's say for simplicity. That's a
Mm.
huge change in employee engagement terms, isn't it?
It is, and some will be for it. Those who, despite the fact that they agree with what their union is doing, some people just have a problem with striking and impacting things like, children's education or travel or whatever. So some people will be positive about it, and other people will be against it. And obviously, all the unions are going to be up in arms. But as you said, when I saw all of this, I just thought, this is Margaret Thatcher. She's taking on the unions. The last time the unions had their powers restricted was during Thatcher.
Yes.
And, all these, because some of the other ones are removing the right to paid leave to carry out trade union activities, isn't
Well,
it?
yeah, well, the one, and I wasn't going to put it so much as paid leave, though you're right. But I'm looking at that and thinking there are many organisations, heavily unionised organisations, the rail sector, the postal sector, the NHS, where you have full-time union reps. It's not paid leave in the sense that you think somebody
Yeah.
takes a few hours off. There are full-time union reps who are paid for by the employer. And if I'm reading this correctly, they're going to disappear.
Yes. And I think,
That's
I have,
huge.
it is huge, and I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I've worked with organisations that are heavily unionised, and what they're fighting for is good, but actually doesn't take into consideration a whole range of other factors, which actually make what they're proposing to be detrimental to the
Mm.
employees. Um, and they perform a great role in terms of, protecting employee rights. And as an employer, it can be a real challenge
Mm.
to navigate around that. So it's going to be phenomenal as and when it happens.
Yes, whether phenomenally good or phenomenally bad is yet to be decided. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
exactly.
I think if I'm reading this correctly, and again I'm very cautious, um, I think this is a big attempt to, let's say, hit the UK productivity challenge. And I
Mm.
mean, Liz Truss, I think, was misquoted. I hope I'm getting this correctly. I believe she was misquoted, but certainly a comment was attributed to her in the past couple of weeks of describing British workers. I think it was something like lazy or not working hard enough or something along those lines. And I think the point that we can see about her is that she thinks we need to massively improve our productivity as a nation. And I think this union stuff is aimed at hitting that and getting rid of what is perceived by the new government as some of the bad union practices that restrict the free market.
Yes, and it relates to what you and I have talked about in previous weeks, where, if you get your organizational productivity up, you earn more, you can give more to
Indeed,
employees, but that comes back to employee engagement.
absolutely.
And it's about involving employees in helping their productivity and performance
I
in order to get the corporate, and then that will helpfully help manage inflation as well.
Yes, I guess, and I'm noticing the clock ticking away, Kimberly. We did say we could talk for hours, but we ought to wrap this one up. But what strikes me as I look at that one is an employer has some levers and a government has some levers. A government does not have usually an employee engagement lever. That's where people need to call you or I as an HR consultant and say, help us get our employee engagement policies, strategies right.
Yeah.
But a government doesn't have those. And I think this is the government attempting to push productivity in one direction. And I think what we now need is employers to rise to the challenge and go, hang on a minute, that's playing hardball. What we also need side by side is employee engagement so we don't alienate the workforce, the
Mm.
unions at the same time. And I hope that's what might come.
Indeed, yes.
On,
Interesting days ahead.
Indeed. On that note, we've totally run out of time, so we ought to wrap up. But Kimberly, as ever, thank you so much for joining me.
Always a pleasure, Jason. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right, see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.